The Rocky Horror Picture Show is a transgressive, horror rock transvestite camp omnisexual musical parody that became an instant cult classic upon its initial release in 1975. Written by Richard O'Brien and Jim Sharman, the film features Tim Curry in drag in perhaps his most iconic role as Dr. Frankenfurter. Newly engaged protagonists Brad and Janet get stranded in the rain on the way home from a friend's wedding. They spot a nearby mansion and head inside to look for help. Inside, they meet Riff Raff, Magenta, and Columbia, who welcome them with the iconic song and dance, Time Warp. Dr. Frankenfurter arrives in his androgynous glory and introduces the crew to his latest creation, Rocky, his sex toy of a man, and the film's namesake. Brad and Janet spend the night, and chaos, murder, and sexual antics ensue, including a special guest appearance of 70s rock icon Meatloaf. The film received excessive hostile reception from critics upon its release and from many members of the public. In a 1980 article for The English Journal, Dan Ward of the State Department of Education of Atlanta writes, "I thought the film unredeemable and as pointless as a pet rock. The Rocky Horror Picture Show is a poor parody of the gothic horror film with a science fiction dressing." Harsh. In 1978, critics in Newsweek described the film as tasteless, plotless, and pointless. Despite these aggressive takes, the film possessed a religious mythic quality that built a niche, cult-like following that appealed to young and gay people. As soon as 1976, the following year, theaters were playing weekly or bi-weekly midnight showings of Rocky Horror, with people coming back to engage week after week. Almost 50 years later, theaters nationwide continue weekly or semi-annual midnight showings. But, as the English Journal asked its readers in 1980, why do kids keep going to it? Well, it's become a cult classic. Perhaps the cultiest cult classic. But what is a cult classic? The extensive life of the film is due to the audience who keeps showing up week after week, as well as the participatory nature of the film, which keeps folk ever engaged through midnight showings, voluntary shadowcasts, callbacks and callouts, and props. A cult classic is loosely defined as a media object that takes on a second life through audience reception. When a film premieres and later is revived by a community who loves it for a specific reason or feeling. In some ways, the fan base interprets the film as a part of their identity. It forms a cult, idealizing or worshipping the film, and frequently participates in forms of ritual behavior. In the Rocky Horror Picture Show, a galactic gothic epic by Jerry B. Brown and Judith Hotch, they share their experience viewing a midnight showing of the Rocky Horror Picture Show for the first time. They describe the film's inclusive elements that engage audiences as community members, noting the long line of youth and queer folk dressed in lingerie and gothic makeup waiting outside the theater. They mention the culture of callbacks, a way of interacting with the film by shouting at the screen at specific visual cues. Most notably, they are surprised by the prop bags, which, they state, included raw frankfurters to hurl at the mad scientist Dr. Frankenfurter, a squirt gun to spray water in the air when the hero and heroine, Brad and Janet, stroll in the rain, an umbrella to unfurl when the fans drench the theater with their water guns, matches to light the way for Brad and Janet in the darkest night, confetti to scatter when mad Dr. Frankie marries his beautiful blonde monster, toast to heave through the air to toast the depraved couple, and other assorted visual and oral puns keeping with the insanity. All of which I can personally attest to. As Patrick T. Kincaid and Michael A. Katovich write in their essay, Towards a Sociology of Cult Films, Reading Rocky Horror, cult films contain themes that 1. Place typical people into atypical situations, Brad and Janet. 2. Allow for narcissistic and empathetic audience identification with subversive characters, Dr. Frankenfurter, Riff Raff, Magenta, and Columbia. 3. Question traditional authority structures, traditional gender and sexual roles. 4. Reflects societal strains, rigid normativity, conformity, and heterosexuality. And 5. Offer interpretable and paradoxical resolutions to these social strains. Sexual and expressive liberation and the pressure to conform to heteronormative society, which is reflected in Dr. Frankenfurter's tragic punishment, death. What separates cult from camp? Well, honestly, nothing. Cult classics are almost inherently camp, which is queer by nature. Frequently, camp media is intentionally gaudy and expressive, born out of the queer experience. Camp media can sometimes, like in the case of Rocky Horror, be described as being so bad it's good. Camp is a term broadly used to describe queer media since the 1960s, with scholars struggling to define the word. Rather, people such as Susan Sontag and Richard Dyer often describe camp media as media possessing a certain sensibility. Sontag states in her essay, Notes on Camp, that the essence of camp is its love of the unnatural, of artifice and exaggeration, something of a private code, a badge of identity even. She also describes camp as a certain mode of aestheticism, one way of seeing the world as an aesthetic phenomenon. And it's being so camp as keeps us going. Dyer refers to camp as a distinctive way of behaving and of relating to each other that we have evolved. To have a good camp together gives you a tremendous sense of identification and belonging. He later says, camp is far more a question of how you respond to things rather than qualities actually inherent in those things. Determining what qualifies as camp is in the eye or lips of the beholder. Despite the wishy-washy definition, a few reasonably consistent qualities are prevalent in camp media that cue us to its orientation, namely, a gay sensibility. John Babuccio, in Camp and the Gay Sensibility, states, I define the gay sensibility as a creative energy reflecting a consciousness that is different from the mainstream, a heightened awareness of certain human complications of feelings that spring from the fact of social oppression. In short, a perception of the world which is colored, shaped, directed, and defined by the fact of one's gayness. Camp media typically reflects this oppressed worldview in some way, intentionally by the filmmaker or by accident. It also typically features a variety of elements, including, but not limited to, glamour and extravagant attire and aestheticism, out-of-date elements such as props, set designs, values, mannerisms, and technology, obsession with death and monsters, irony, tragedy or melodrama, humor, taking serious or grim situations and making light of them, subversion or destruction of gender and sex roles as means of expressive, sexual, and emotional reclamation, satire, often targeted towards traditional social values, the obsession with the female body, and theatricality and performance. Robert Ebert states, Rocky Horror remains very much a filmed play. The choreography, the compositions, and even the cast's attitudes imply a stage ambiance, and it invites the kind of laughter and audience participation that makes sense only if the performers are there on the stage, creating mutual karma. Rocky Horror hits all of these marks, becoming the epitome of camp film. In a 2022 review of the Rocky Horror Picture Show for the Film magazine, Sam Sewell Peterson states, the Rocky Horror Picture Show is most commonly described as a poster child for camp. That is to say, it goes in for gaudy costume design, flamboyant song and dance numbers, and intentionally hammy dialogue, like a drag catwalk show viewed through the prism of love of genre storytelling. The film is fully aware of what it is and who it's for, and is not afraid to scream it from the rooftops. Rocky Horror Picture Show is an essential film for the LGBTQ+ community, especially in rural areas. The film and its midnight showing screening culture provides visibility, representation, and a safe space that encourages freedom of expression and self-acceptance for gender nonconforming and queer individuals. For many people, watching the Rocky Horror Picture Show was their introduction to queer culture or gender and sexual subversion. It provides validity and visibility to trans folk, non-binary people, and gay people alike. Often, particularly in rural communities, it's the only representation queer folk might get in person. Also, notably, it was written by a non-binary person, Richard O'Brien, intentionally for queer people. In a 1991 article for the journal Film Comment, titled Curse of the Cult People, Jay Hoberman states, the exaggerated dress-up and out-front sexual display, the experimenting with different identities, the goal of living out a fantasy, has a lot to do with the meaning of rock and roll, as does the incorporation of the audience into the spectacle. The midnight showings of the film also provide a community for people otherwise cast aside in society. The showings are a safe space for queer folk to gather and see people they may not recognize as safe going about their normal day-to-day. Most importantly, it allows them to meet friends and build a safe network of people like themselves. Christy Tyson of Spokane, Washington states, "The Rocky Horror Picture Show draws hundreds, primarily young adults, many disaffiliated, non-joiners. Those who are at school are either invisible or labeled weirdos. The messages in Rocky Horror are clear, simple, and often repeated. It's okay to be different. It's okay to feel good. You can make your fantasies reality. For the first glorious time, they are the in-group." In the film comment, Jonathan Rosenbaum states, "You still have that almost religious communal experience at certain rock concerts. I see Rocky Horror as one of the last gasps of collectivized theatrical moviegoing before video took over and automatized the audience." The second life of the film also relies on the abundance of people willing to participate, whether by joining a shadow cast to reenact the movie, throwing rice at the screen during the opening wedding scene, or shouting "fuck you" at the creepy criminologist. Midnight showings also allow queer people to take off their masks and be weird. People can be their authentic selves, or really, any version of themselves they'd like to be. Self-expression and acceptance are encouraged and almost mandatory. You can dress sexy and be celebrated as sexy in your body regardless of your appearance. What race, religion, or sexuality you are, or what facade you return to at 9 a.m. on Monday, does not matter. As Dr. Frankenfurter would say,
"Don't dream it, be it. Don't dream it, be it. Don't dream it, be
I'm Noah. I am a trans man and gay. The towns that I grew up in are they're small. And with the schools that I went to, it's like most of the people there were very homophobic or racist and just generally closed-minded. It's definitely hard because even the people that say that they are allies of the community are constantly misgendering me. I first heard of the Rocky Horror Picture Show at my dad's girlfriend Lori, her friend's birthday party. Everyone dressed up as Rocky Horror Picture Show characters, and they had the movie on a loop the entire time the party was going. So I got to watch it a few times, and for me it was the first time that I saw other people around me who liked something that had queer symbolism. By that point, I just kind of assumed that me being LGBT was just something that I should keep to myself in this town. So seeing other people watching a movie that very clearly had cross-dressing, and it was just interesting to where it was hey, not everyone hates gay people here. And that was definitely a new experience for me. I went once with my dad's girlfriend and her friends and everything. And I remember I dressed up as Eddie, which was really cool for me because I was still closeted at the time. So it was yeah, I get to dress up as a boy in public with people I know. How it's just everyone there is there for the same thing. It's kind of what gives the title the cult classic, because it's everyone is there and they know what to do and they all love the movie. They all love dressing up for the movie. And it's really interesting because I've shown it to friends and they've, without knowing that they have showings like this, describe oh, it'd be so cool to go out and see this with people and dress up as the characters. And I even showed it to my boyfriend and he was like, I want to dress up as the lips in the beginning. When you see it in person, they sell little gift bags of everything you need. It's just a giant group role-playing experience of a movie that we all love. When I looked at it, it's I saw me, and that's important. It's valuable to me because it's more of a sense of community with the people in my life.
Hi, I'm Mel. I live in bumfuck nowhere, PA. Rocky Horror was the first different thing that I came across in my youth, if that makes sense. There's a lot of closeted queer people in the area, and I think it's only taken to the younger generations and definitely the pandemic to really like make people sit with themselves and be like, yeah, it's okay to not fit in this little box. I definitely grew up as a straight little white girl going to church with my grandma. I'm not gonna lie, there definitely was a very blanketed culture of shame on pretty much anyone. I mean, I feel like a lot of people have things about them that they feel shameful about and then just kind of temper it down in public, especially in religious communities, because that's kind of the only thing small towns in the middle of nowhere got going for them. Somebody's got a birthday, you have it at the church hall. Somebody died, you have it at the church hall. Somebody graduated, you have it at the church hall. Somebody got married, you have it at the church hall. So if you don't fit into that community or the standards of that community, you've got nothing. You're outcast. There was definitely a lot of pressure to fit that very standard mold of what a young girl should be. And yeah, it didn't hit me until I was in like later childhood, early teens, where I was like, hey, wait a minute. Maybe I don't want to look and dress and talk and act like that. I took a step back and I said, what is going on here? And that's when you see how nasty it can be and how, like, very little they're actually there for you if you step out of that box. And once I was out, I was like, well, I'm out of the box. Nothing holding me back anymore. I don't care what those people think, so I'm just gonna do what makes me happy. In our small town, there was a movie theater. And actually, my dad worked there when he was a teenager. And we were walking down the street, and they had a poster, like many small theaters do. They said, Rocky Horror Live Show, October, it's a Halloween event. They're like, Rocky Horror Live Show at midnight or whatever. And I saw the poster, and I was like, what is that? That looks so fun. And I was probably only maybe like 7 years old or something like that. And my dad was like, oh, that's so cool. And then I was like, what is it? And he's like, I'm not going to tell you. And I was like, can we go to it? And he's like, nope, absolutely not. You forget you saw that. That was the first time you had been to a live show, right? Was when we went in high school. I had heard that it was a thing and I had seen the movie, but like that was the first time we ever went to a live show. It was with people older than us. I don't know, we just had a level of maturity where we fit in with the older kids more than we did people in our own grade. And that exposed us to a lot. People who do it a lot, they know. They go in there, they've got their costume on, they know what props they need to bring, they know when the audio cues are, they know what to say, and they get the jokes. If you're a first-time viewer, they make fun of you for not getting it. It's such a underground thing, especially in really small communities. And then you see just an entire auditorium filled with people that are just as weird as you are, and you probably never would have met them otherwise. It's like, you're all there, you all have something in common. Like, half of those people, if you would have seen them at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in a grocery store, you wouldn't have thought you had a single thing in common with them. And also the costumes. I adore seeing what people wear to these shows. It's fantastic. It's a fashion show in and of itself. Like, sometimes you see somebody show up in, like, pleasers and a diaper, and then sometimes you see somebody show up in, like, fishnets and a skirt, and it's, like, all of these different costumes, but it's, like, 40-year-old men sometimes, and it's, like, there's a piece to it that isn't just the clothing they're putting on, it's, like, the whole thing. I love it. It's so freeing. And it's so emotional. For, like, such a goofy film, there are very deep undertones to self-discovery, self-acceptance, and pursuing that in the face of adversity. Very much so, be yourself. Just the freedom that this film provides. It gave generations of queer, closeted... This film gives you permission to go outside of the box. The message that there is a community wherever you are, one of the things that I enjoy is bringing somebody new to that experience, and I think that's why it perpetuates itself. I think that society is still in a place where that subject matter is kind of taboo. There is no right or wrong way to be weird. That's what it is. It's refuge for weirdos in the middle of nowhere.
Let's start by talking about the remake. In 2016, Fox released the Rocky Horror Picture Show, Let's Do the Time Warp Again, starring Laverne Cox, a prominent transgender actress. There are many aspects of the film they got right. Firstly, it features a primarily talented and semi-queer cast. Regardless of my distaste for the film, its aesthetics and glamour were beautiful and extravagant. Adam Lambert played an excellent Meatloaf, and Reeve Carney as Riff Raff was uncannily similar to Richard O'Brien's appearance and behavior in the original film. However, despite their talent in other areas, the rest of the cast does not carry the same chaotic energy Rocky Horror calls for. I also appreciate the inclusion of Tim Curry, the OG Frankenfurter, as the criminologist. Kenny Ortega, the director, who is gay, was an unusual choice for the film. Having choreographed iconic scenes in Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Dirty Dancing, directing the children's camp hit High School Musical, and working with artists like Cher, Michael Jackson, and Miley Cyrus, he knows his way around camp media, queer icons, and dancing. But his area may be too family-friendly for such a film. Consequently, the TV release movie just didn't land. I think another big reason for its flop was due to its top-down nature. The original Rocky Horror Picture Show was born in a repressed time from the mind of a queer artist with a vision. It was bottom-up. For the queer, from the queer. It provided first-of-its-kind representation, a unique queer cult community, and sexual liberation, while advocacy for the respect and civility of the LGBTQ+ community is ever necessary. The community's needs are not the same as 50 years ago. Hence, remaking an iconic film that still provides excitement in today's youth and the queer scene is frivolous. It feels instead like a flashy, appropriative cash grab. It lost its original transgressive nature. Aside from that, Fox commissioned it. Hence, its sexual nature was toned down, which, for the Rocky Horror Picture Show, somewhat defeats the whole purpose. As Caroline Fromke writes in an article for Vox, to make the musical feel boring would require some real sanitizing effort. This version of Rocky Horror doesn't seem to feel comfortable doing the one thing Rocky Horror should do best, queering the fuck out of everyone and everything in its path by subverting every gender and sexuality expectation you might have. And don't let me get started on its cheesiness. This remake was especially troublesome considering the uptick in queer and gay appropriation in contemporary media culture. Being gay is trendy. Take, for example, RuPaul's Drag Race. It's amusing and very gay, but toxic and controversial nonetheless. A queer show made for straight audiences that brings no immediate change or significant representation to the struggles of the LGBTQ+ community. However, this trend has created more space in media culture for queerness. 10 years ago, musical artists like Ash Nico, Lil Nas X, and Dove Cameron would not have been able to be so explicitly queer if it were not marketable and hip. Queer icons of the early 2000s and 2010s, including Lady Gaga, Adam Lambert, and Miley Cyrus, helped pioneer LGBTQ+ representation and expression in contemporary pop culture. However, the threshold for acceptable queerness was much lower. Only being in my 20s, I'm old enough to remember the days of judgmental outrage when Lady Gaga came out as bisexual, which inspired the hit Poker Face, when Miley, formerly Hannah Montana, came swinging on her wrecking ball, when Hayley Kiyoko, another former Disney Channel actress, released Girls Like Girls, and when Lil Nas X came out as gay after releasing hit Old Town Road. Although our state in politics is dark and uncertain, and pop culture still appropriates queer culture, devaluing LGBTQ+ representation, we've come a long way in the past the past 10 years. And to quote Phineas T. Barnum, all publicity is good publicity.